At exactly 2:17 every morning, the sound would begin. Not loud, not frantic at first, just a low, trembling meow that slipped under bedroom doors and curled through the hallway like mist. It always started the same way, the soft click of paws against hardwood, the faint brush of fur against the wall, and then that sound, a drawn-out cry, almost careful, as if the one making it was trying not to wake the entire world, just the one person who needed to hear it. Milo was an orange tabby with a white chest and a tail that curved slightly at the tip, like a question mark that had never quite been answered. During the day he was gentle, almost comically affectionate. He followed sunlight across the floor. He watched dust float in beams of light. He slept in quiet spirals on the couch. But at night, something changed. At 2:17 a.m., without fail, he would walk down the hallway and sit in front of the closed guest room door. The door hadn't been opened in 8 months, and every night Milo would stare at it and cry. To be honest, at first, they thought it was grief. Grief makes humans strange. Maybe it makes animals strange too. The guest room used to belong to Eleanor, Grandma Eleanor, as everyone called her, though Milo never needed the grandma. To him, she was simply the warmest presence in the house, the softest voice, the slowest footsteps, the only human who truly understood the art of stillness. Eleanor had moved into the guest room 2 years earlier when her health began to decline. The doctors called it congestive heart failure. She called it just a tired engine. She tried to laugh about it, but sometimes her breathing told a different story. It was around that time that Milo entered their lives. He had been the smallest kitten at the shelter, the runt, the one who didn't fight for food, the one who didn't claw at the cage door for attention. He simply sat there, wide-eyed, watching the world with an expression too old for such a tiny body. Eleanor chose him, or perhaps he chose her. When they brought him home, he walked through the house like he had been there before. He sniffed corners. He examined table legs. He paused in the hallway, then turned directly toward the guest room. Eleanor was lying in bed, propped up by pillows, sunlight resting on her silver hair. Milo climbed onto the bed without hesitation and settled at her feet. He didn't leave. From that day forward, he became her shadow. He would sit beside her during afternoon tea. He would curl against her ribs during naps. When her breathing became shallow at night, he would inch closer, pressing his small body against her chest, as if to lend her the rhythm of his own heart. "She says he listens," Eleanor once told her daughter Rebecca. "When I talk to him, he listens like it matters." Maybe it did. There is something about animals that makes confession easier. They do not interrupt, they do not correct, they do not rush to fix what is broken. They simply remain. And sometimes remaining is everything. As Eleanor's condition worsened, Milo rarely left her room. Even when Rebecca tried to carry him out to give him a break, he would slip free and pad back down the hallway, determined. When hospice nurses came, Milo watched them carefully. He never hissed, never hid. He observed with wide amber eyes, as if memorizing every detail. On Eleanor's final night, the house was silent, except for the oxygen machine and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Milo lay across her legs. Rebecca sat beside the bed, holding her mother's hand. At some point past midnight, Eleanor's breathing changed, slower, thinner, like a thread being gently pulled away. Milo lifted his head. He stood, walked up her body, and rested his paws lightly on her chest. He leaned in close to her face, and then, quietly, he began to purr. Not the playful rumble he used during feeding time, not the curious trill he used when exploring. This was different. It was deep, steady, almost deliberate. Rebecca would later say it sounded like he was holding something together. Eleanor exhaled one last time. Milo's purring stopped. He did not cry. He did not panic. He simply lay beside her until morning light crept through the curtains. After the funeral, no one had the heart to clear out the room. The bed remained made, the closet remained full. The faint scent of lavender and old books lingered in the air. Rebecca closed the door. "It's too soon," she whispered. The house grew quieter after that, and 3 nights later at 2:17 a.m., Milo began to cry. The first time, Rebecca assumed he was lonely. She opened the door. He walked in slowly, circled the bed, and jumped onto it. He lay in the exact spot Eleanor once occupied. He stayed there for an hour. After that, Rebecca decided it was better to keep the door closed. "It's not healthy," she told her husband Daniel, "for any of us." Milo disagreed. Each night he returned to the door. He did not scratch wildly. He did not throw himself against it. He simply sat, tail wrapped neatly around his paws, and meowed. The sound was not loud. It was intentional. Weeks passed, then months. Neighbors commented on how calm Milo seemed during the day. He still played with Rebecca's young son, Noah. He still perched on windowsills. He still purred during petting sessions. But at 2:17 a.m., the hallway became a vigil. At first they tried ignoring it. Then they tried distracting him with treats. Daniel once carried him back to the living room and shut the bedroom door firmly. Milo returned within minutes. It was exhausting. Grief had already frayed their nerves. Sleep deprivation made it worse. "He needs to move on," Daniel muttered one night. Rebecca didn't respond, because part of her understood. She too sometimes stood in that hallway during the day, staring at the door. But she didn't open it. Time, they believed, would settle everything. And for a while, it seemed like it might. Around the 6th month, the crying softened. Some nights, it didn't happen at all. Rebecca began sleeping through the early hours again. The tension eased. Then came the storm. It started late in the evening, thick clouds swallowing the sky, thunder rolling like distant drums. By midnight, rain lashed against the windows, sharp and relentless. The old house groaned under the wind. Noah climbed into his parents' bed, frightened by the lightning. Milo paced. He hated storms, he always had. But this night was different. At 2:17 a.m. the cry returned. Not soft, not patient, urgent. It sliced through the thunder. Rebecca's eyes flew open. Milo wasn't simply meowing. He was yowling. There is a difference. One is communication, the other is alarm. He ran down the hallway, then back to their bedroom. He meowed again, louder. His tail puffed slightly, ears angled forward. "What is it?" Rebecca whispered, sitting up. Milo turned and sprinted toward the guest room door. Daniel groaned. "Not tonight." But Milo began clawing at the bottom of the door. Not violently, desperately. The wood rattled. Between thunderclaps, Rebecca heard something else, a faint, sharp popping sound. She couldn't place it. Milo cried again, higher now, almost breaking. "And this is the moment I want you to pause and consider something. If you were standing there, exhausted, grieving, half asleep in the middle of a storm, would you open that door? Would you trust an animal's insistence over your own logic? Would you risk feeling foolish, dramatic, even unstable, just because a creature who cannot speak your language seems to be pleading?" Think about that, truly. Because Rebecca hesitated. Daniel shook his head. He just associates the room with her. It's the storm. Another pop, closer. Milo stepped back, then lunged at the door again. Rebecca moved. She didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was the tone of his cry. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at her between yowls, as if begging her to follow. She turned the knob. The air inside the room felt different, heavy. The smell hit first, not lavender, not dust, something sharper, burning plastic. Milo darted past her and ran straight to the closet. He didn't jump on the bed. He didn't circle the room. He went directly to the far corner, where the old extension cord ran behind a small wooden dresser Eleanor used to keep near the closet door. He began scratching at the baseboard. That popping sound came again. Rebecca stepped closer. There, barely visible behind the dresser, a thin line of orange light flickered. For a second, her mind refused to process it. Then she saw it clearly. The extension cord, installed years ago to power a small space heater during winter, had frayed. The storm's moisture had seeped into the old wiring. Sparks were spitting from a melted section of cable. The wall was beginning to blacken. A small flame licked upward. Daniel was suddenly beside her. Oh my God! He yanked the dresser aside. Rebecca grabbed the cord and pulled, burning her fingers in the process. Daniel rushed to the breaker panel in the hallway and flipped the switch. The sparks stopped. The flame shrank, then died. Smoke lingered in thin grey threads. They stood there, breathing hard. If the fire had caught the curtains, if it had reached the old wooden closet, if it had happened an hour later when they were deeper asleep, the house could have filled with smoke before anyone woke up. Noah was still in their bed. Milo sat near the scorched baseboard, tail curled tightly around his body. He wasn't crying anymore. He was watching them, watching to make sure they understood. Prepare your heart for this part, because Rebecca did something she hadn't done in months. She knelt on the floor of that room. She pressed her forehead gently against Milo's side, and she cried. Not the quiet tears of contained grief, but the kind that shake you. You were protecting us, she whispered. The realization unfolded slowly. All those nights, all those 2:17 a.m. cries. He hadn't been clinging to the past. He had been stationed at that door. The faulty wiring had likely been deteriorating for weeks. The storm simply accelerated what was already inevitable. Milo, with senses sharper than theirs, must have heard the faint buzzing long before the first spark. Cats can detect high-frequency sounds humans cannot. They can smell electrical overheating before smoke becomes visible. He had known, and he had tried to tell them, not once, not twice, but every single night. To be honest, it is difficult to carry the weight of that realization, because how many times had they dismissed him? How many times had they said, "It's just a cat"? Daniel crouched down and stroked Milo's head. "Okay," he said softly. "We hear you." The next morning, electricians confirmed it. The wiring behind the wall was severely damaged. It could have ignited fully at any moment. The storm hadn't caused the problem. It had revealed it. And Milo had been guarding the warning signs. In the days that followed, something shifted inside the house. The guest room door remained open. Rebecca sorted through Eleanor's belongings, not with avoidance, but with intention. She donated clothes. She packed photos into albums. She kept the lavender sachets. She kept the bedspread. Milo no longer cried at night. He slept at the foot of Rebecca's bed instead, peacefully, as if his watch had ended. But the story does not stop there, because sometimes the greatest miracles are not in the flames that didn't spread, but in the invisible threads that connect hearts across time. A week after the incident, Rebecca sat in the newly cleared guest room. Sunlight filled the space. The scorched section of wall had been repaired. Milo jumped onto the windowsill. For a moment, she saw it clearly. The echo of another afternoon months ago, when Eleanor sat in that same chair, Milo in her lap. She says he listens. Rebecca closed her eyes. "What were you trying to say back then?" she murmured. And for the first time, she considered something she had avoided. Maybe Milo's nightly vigils hadn't only been about wiring. Maybe he had sensed the weakening structure long before visible damage. Maybe he had been responding to subtle shifts, temperature changes, faint electrical hums, signals human senses simply overlook. But maybe, just maybe, he had also been responding to love. Animals anchor themselves where connection is strongest. Eleanor had been his first bond. After she passed, the room still held the imprint of that connection. He guarded it, and in guarding it, he guarded them. It is hard to explain this without sounding sentimental. But there are moments in life when logic and love overlap in ways that feel almost supernatural. Milo did not understand insurance policies. He did not calculate fire risks. He did not mourn the way humans mourn. He sensed something wrong, and he refused to ignore it. Weeks later, when another storm rolled in, Rebecca noticed something different. Milo did not pace. He did not cry. He lay calmly beside Noah, who now insisted on sleeping with the fire hero cat. Yes, that's what Noah called him at school. The story had spread through the neighborhood, but Milo did not seem aware of his hero status. He simply existed as he always had, steady, present, listening. And maybe that is the lesson buried quietly inside this story. Not that animals are magical, not that they are mystical guardians sent from somewhere beyond, but that they pay attention. They notice shifts in the air. They feel tension before it erupts. They respond without ego. They act without needing credit, and sometimes they persist long after we've stopped listening. For months, Rebecca replayed those nights in her mind, the irritation, the dismissal, the temptation to rehome him. That part hurt the most, because loyalty often reveals itself in the moments we nearly reject it. To be honest, she struggled with guilt. But one evening, as she sat on the couch, Milo climbed into her lap and pressed his forehead against her chin. It was the same gesture he used with Eleanor, and in that quiet contact, Rebecca felt something soften. Forgiveness, perhaps. From him. From herself. Life continued. Birthdays were celebrated. Homework battles were fought. The repaired guest room became a small reading space. Rebecca placed Eleanor's old armchair near the window. Milo often slept there, not guarding, just resting. Sometimes visitors would ask, "Is this the cat who saved your house?" Rebecca would smile. Yes. But privately she thought differently. He didn't just save the house, he saved the understanding. He forced them to pay attention. He turned grief into awareness. He transformed a closed door into an open one. And perhaps most importantly, he reminded them that love does not end when breath does. It shifts, it echoes, it lingers in hallways at 2:17 a.m., waiting for someone to listen. Years later, Noah would barely remember the storm, but he would remember this, that when something feels wrong, you don't ignore it. That when someone, human or animal, calls out with urgency, you investigate. That protection doesn't always roar. Sometimes it meows. So let me ask you something now. Has an animal in your life ever tried to tell you something you almost ignored? Have you ever dismissed a behavior only to realize later it meant more than you understood at the time? These moments matter, because connection is not measured in language. It is measured in attention. Milo grew older, as all living beings do. His orange fur lightened around the muzzle. His jumps became slower. But he never returned to that 2:17 vigil. Not once. It was as if the task had been completed. As if a chapter had closed. One quiet evening, years after the fire that never was, Rebecca found herself sitting alone in the reading room. Rain tapped gently against the window. Milo slept in Eleanor's chair. The house felt warm, safe. She realized something then that is difficult to put into words. If Milo had not insisted, if they had not opened that door, if the storm had come on a night when they were too tired to care, everything could have changed. The photos, the memories, the life they continued building, all fragile, all dependent on a small, persistent cry in the dark. Prepare your heart for this truth. Sometimes the ones who protect us cannot speak. They cannot argue their case. They cannot present evidence. They only show up again and again and again until we finally understand. If you've read this far, I would truly love to know, what is the name of your cat, or your dog, or the animal who once surprised you with something you can't fully explain? Has a pet ever stood guard over you in a way that changed how you see the world? Share their name. Share their story. Because somewhere tonight, in a quiet hallway at 2:17 a.m., another small guardian might be sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to listen.